this panel on how to get published. Here's this recording. Well, the whole publication process is quite challenging, can be really frustrating. And I think it's good to organize these kind of panels where experienced people give. Well, one reason is that it's not challenging question, it's not really crucial, but can be rewarding at the same time. So what I'm hoping for the panelists to provide is some clues on how to make it through the publication process and how to make it rewarding, because then it can be quite fun, I guess. Maybe I'll first briefly introduce the panelists. So we have Alison McCulloch, that's how her name is pronounced. She's not here today, but who has recorded a video message. She's the co-editor of Nationalism and Ethnic Politics. We then have Søren Kal, who's not based in New Zealand, but in the UK, who's the co-editor of Palgrave's Federalism, Internal Conflict. And then we have Timothy Agarin, who is the editor of Roundtable Studies in Nationalism and Ethnicity, and the co-editor of Nationalism and Ethnic Politics. Then Christine Zuber, co-editor of Studies, Daryl Dorff, I hope policy and people editing, being the editor of book series and journals, which I guess makes a really broad experience. And the way we decided to proceed is that we'll first do a first round of introduction of your publications, in which you can share your experience as both editors and authors, because all of you have also published. And then we'll do a second round. We've prepared a few questions for you to address, and then we'll open up to the public so that people can ask questions, or if you have anything to add, you get another chance. Timothy, I think we had agreed that you would start by showing the video message that Alison has recorded.
Indeed, yes. Let me do that. Okay, let me see. Can you hear the voice?
Not yet.
Okay, let me try it again. This should be there. Yeah. Okay.
Hi everyone.
Okay.
And apologies for not being able to be live with you, but such is the nature of time zones and international conferences. As the editor-in-chief of Nationalism and Ethnic Politics, one of my main responsibilities is to conduct desk reviews of all the research manuscripts that are submitted to the journal. So I thought I might share with you today 5 criteria that I use to assess whether or not to send a manuscript out to external reviewers. So the first thing I consider is whether or not your topic aligns with the journal's aims and scope, right? Does it fit? While Nationalism and Ethnic Politics is a specialized journal, our scope is still quite broad, literally the varied political aspects of nationalism and ethnicity. We accept qualitative and quantitative papers, comparisons, and case studies alike. So we tend to have a fairly generous reading of nationalism and ethnicity, but it still needs to be clear that this is something that is covered in your paper. So making sure you read the journal's aims and scope section prior to submission and making sure you align with it is an important first step. Second, does the paper move forward our understanding of nationalism and ethnic politics in specific and innovative ways? Not every paper is going to be groundbreaking or discipline defining, but you still need to be clear about what is new, novel, or unique about your paper. Right? Is there a theoretical contribution? Is there an empirical advancement of our knowledge? Be precise and make sure your paper identifies its contribution. Right? What's compelling about your paper? To which literature or debates does it seek to contribute? 3, is your manuscript methodologically rigorous? I see a lot of manuscripts that omit any discussion of their methods. More so in qualitative paper than in quantitative ones, But even there, I've seen some quantitative papers with some murky method sections. So how did you conduct your research? How should the reader know that your results are reliable? A method section doesn't have to be long. A paragraph should do it. But there absolutely needs to be somewhere in the paper that lays out what methodological choices you made in conducting your research, right? How did you get to these findings? 4, will your manuscript appeal to a global audience? This is especially important for nationalism and ethnic politics. We have a wide and diverse global audience. It's therefore helpful to frame your research in such a way as to speak to a wide readership, right? Why should our readers download and read your paper? And there are 2 aspects to consider here. So even if you're writing a case study, and we get and publish a lot of case-based research, it's important to connect the case to wider political puzzles, right? So maybe mentioning in the introduction or conclusion that sort of wider framing and who else might benefit from reading your paper other than area specialists. Likewise, don't assume that everyone reading your paper is an area specialist. So you need to find that right balance between providing enough background context so that non-specialists can engage with your argument, but also not quite so much that it loses the interests of those area specialists. And then 5, have you read and followed the journal's instructions for authors, right? Make sure you follow it. Nationalism and Ethnic Politics, for example, has a maximum word count of 9,500. Make sure you don't exceed it. And keep in mind that reviewers almost always ask you to add and not subtract more research on revision. So best to give yourself a little bit of bandwidth on that first round. We also offer format-free submission, which means that you don't have to format your paper to the journal citation style before the paper is accepted. Not all journals will offer that though, so you should know beforehand whether or not that's necessary to adhere to the citation style, lest your paper be returned to you on a formatting issue. So that's my 5-point plan. Be sure your paper aligns with the aims and scope of the journal. Be clear about its contribution. Be clear about its methods. Try to appeal to a wide and diverse audience, and follow the instructions for authors. So I welcome your submissions to Nationalism and Ethnic Politics. The journal has a long-standing relationship with RC14, which I am keen to see continue, and for which this conference offers exciting opportunities. So I do hope to see some of your manuscripts in my inbox soon. Feel free to reach out if you want to talk about it before submission as well. So thank you and good luck, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Alison. Back to Johanna.
Thanks, Timofey. Let's continue with you now that you're already unmuted. So you can add anything to what Alison said and share your experience as the editor of Routledge's Studies in Nationalism and Ethnicity.
Thanks. Yeah, let me go live then. Yeah, there are several things I think that Alison points out that are relevant for all of us in the publishing, on the publishing side of academic journals. And the 5-point checklist, I think that she has provided is crucial for delivering all papers across the boards to whatever journals we are talking about. There is a significant difference, I think, between journals as such and their scope. And one of the points that Alison highlighted in her overview. In this regard, I think this is where I can pick up from her. So from our perspective, and I think we will hear more in this from Christina and Søren later, journals essentially fall into 3 parts, into 3 different segments. One is a discipline-specific journal. 2 is original or issue-specific journal. And then there are journals that are dedicated more to methodology of research, but they also require effectively a contribution to the discipline. And depending on these three types of journal, I think the author approach to publication should also be quite different in relation particularly to how you pitch your contributions to the journal. And I think in a rather practical sense, this is what is the starting point for all authors throughout their research careers. So even we as publishers struggle with this pitch when we do write our papers. This boils down to one essential point. If the journal is a disciplinary journal, then you have to make sure that however specific your paper results are from your case study or case studies, they speak to the wider discipline that the journal is addressing. If the journal you're sending your paper into is the case specific or area journal, for example, Journal of Baltic Studies, from my PhD background, then you have to make a relevant, you make your publication contribution relevant for that area specialism, even if it speaks to wider process of democratization, civil society building, or minority stuff. Finally, if the journal that you're targeting your publication to is of methodological commitment, more than about commitment to extending theoretical debate in your subdiscipline or understanding of issues or geographical areas, then the pitch should be clearly about the methodology, whether you foreground the conversation about the explicit methods, how you have done research, how you have selected your cases, or otherwise. This will need to come first before you engage in discussion of the literature on the case or theoretical discussions out there. So I think these three different types of journal are understanding of what actually is required of any contribution at the initial stage, how you pass this threshold of being accepted for and considered for publication. But from specific experience in nationalism and ethnic politics, as a co-editor, I have literally nothing to add to what Alison says, except for paying crucial attention to the scope and the reach of the journal. If it is a journal with a global audience, then however insightful your paper contribution might be to one single issue in one single community or in one single country, it needs to speak to the broader audience. We always underline that to our contributors, and successful contributions all do that. So even if we have a very specific paper that talks about one aspect of inter-ethnic relations in one specific country, its lessons can be transposed to any other context elsewhere. Second, I think from the point of view of a co-editor of the journal, it is essential to understand that as an author, you cannot explain the world. So you have to be straightforward and upfront about your statement of aims in the paper. And this is also something that is usefully incorporated into introduction as well as into the abstract of the paper that you submit. Alternatively, anticipating that your reader will be looking for your statement of aims and research questions somewhere later is simply asking too much of your readership. And this is so much to the journal process in itself, publication journal process, process of publication in the journal. But as a series editor of a Routledge series in Ethnicity and Nationalism, I would also need to insert an important corrective to these contributions that we have just outlined. The papers that I usually submitted to journals tend to be relatively short, so you can engage only with a part of the empirical puzzle out there that you're trying to explain. Publications of a book length allow you to touch upon many vectors, how that puzzle has evolved, will evolve potentially, or how different scholars have been approaching this empirical puzzle out there. And as such, we need to admit that the preference of authors to contribute book-long publications has been dwindling over the past years and decades, in part because it is a laborious process that requires a lot of awareness of the state of the field and research, but also ability to reflect on the on the impact that your case study and your contribution will have down the line. Different from contributions to journal, which are relatively short, let's say around 10,000 words. Book-long publications tend to be longer, and they, as a result, live longer. So when you are pitching your book to any series, either to mine or to Søren's, the effective way to do so is to underline the longevity of your argument for the scholarship, whether it will be whether it is interesting now or has been interesting in the past is less important than the fact that your contribution will be read 5 or 10 years down the line. And that therein, I think, sits the key difference between the journals and books. But in principle, the process of finding the right pitch, identifying your audience clearly, and framing your argument in a accessible way are the 3 key factors that are allow us to see a successful and good, potentially good contribution to either journals or books. And additional issues related to the length and the focus and your preference in formatting citations are secondary when we think about quality publications. It is the focus of your publication and the focus on the audience of those who are going to read it that are decisive for success of any academic publishing output. I'll leave you with that, and we can come back to all of this in your questions after we have my co-panelists that present. Thank you.
Thank you, Timofey. I'll immediately hand over to Søren to share his experience as the co-editor of Palgrave's Federalism Internal Conflict series.
Thank you, Johanna. Thank you, Timofey. God, there's an awful lot that's already been said. So I thought I'll talk you through a little bit about our series. So the Federalism and Internal Conflict series started 2 years ago, I think now, at Palgrave Macmillan. I co-edited this with my wonderful colleague, Eva Maria Belzer, whom you can meet tonight for the keynote. So you can meet both editors if you're keen on it. What do we publish? We publish a lot of different formats. Obviously, it's a book series, so we don't publish short journal articles, but we publish something called pivots, which are pieces of around 35 to 50,000 words. So basically extended journal articles. We also publish longer monographs, 80 to 100,000 words. You will find that book publishers are always hesitant to publish well above 100,000 words, because then the printing costs become very expensive, which makes a book as such very expensive. And we publish edited volumes. I thought what I do is I talk you a little bit through how the publication process works, so you get a feeling for that, and then link it to this idea of how to get published. So it all starts with a proposal. Okay, so a proposal is basically a selling pitch, right? So this is my idea, this is what I want to do. Now, for some of you, this might be a PhD thesis that you want to pitch to get published. Some of you, it might be the follow-up book. Some of you, it might be conference proceedings that you want to pitch as an edited volume. When I read proposals, there's a number of things I look for. The first thing always is originality. Is it something interesting? Is it something new, right? I mean, the series is purposely called Federalism and Internal Conflict. We are not called Territorial Politics. We are not called Federalism and Decentralization. All of these book series exist as well, right? So you need to pitch it, as Timofey said, to us, but you also need to make it interesting. We define both federalism and conflict very widely. So we recently published a book, for example, on Ukraine. Now, there isn't really a federal debate in Ukraine, but there is a debate about decentralization. We've also a while ago published a book on discussing diversity in established federations. Looked at Canada and the USA and other cases and how diversity is discussed there and has led to conflict. So most book series tend to be quite flexible in how they interpret kind of the framework, but you do need to pitch it to the framework and pitch it to the book series the same as you would pitch it to a journal, right? The worst thing you can have is an editor looking at it and thinking, wrong journal or wrong book series. Okay, so think about, why do I target this series, or why do I target this publication format? So once we have the proposal, we look for originality. The second thing is, we do already judge a book by the cover. I'm sorry, we do that. Like, we do judge your potential for a book by the proposal. So is it properly written? Is it properly formatted? Is the English checked? Right? Those things matter, because when it's a kind of thing where we are not sure whether we want to take it forward, those things can make a difference. Once the editors have kind of said, yes, we really like the proposal, yes, we really like the topic, it goes to the really the thing that's probably most important, which is a review process. Right? There are different stages of review, and I'm sure we will talk about how the review process works and what you can do to make sure you go through the review process. But there is a number of review processes that we use, depending on what kind of publication you're pitching. The most standard review is that we say we like the proposal, we'd like to have 2 chapters, which we can then, with the proposal, send out for review. For our series, we usually use 1 or 2 reviewers. Sometimes when it's a topic that either Eva Maria or I feel very close to, we will only use 1 reviewer and then use the editor experience as well. And sometimes when it's a topic that we had a proposal a while ago about courts in Africa, the role of constitutional courts in Africa. Now, that was really interesting, but so far away from what Eva Maria and I do that we send it out to 2 different reviewers. So it's basically the review process that decides whether the book gets published or not. The publisher, in order to issue a book contract, needs to have a positive review. Okay, and there's nothing we can do about this as editors. We can make a bit of a difference if the review is, it's interesting, but there are a few flaws. Then we can jump in and say, we think this can be addressed. But if the review is negative, then the publisher will always throw it out. That's a general rule. So I'm sure we will talk about this in more detail, what you can do to make the review a success. The good news about reviews for book proposals is that they tend to be quicker than reviews for journal articles, and that's because publishers tend to reward their reviewers. So in other words, they get book vouchers, or in some cases even get paid. So the turnaround time tends to be a bit quicker. It's an incentive structure there. Let's assume all the good things have happened. You went through the review, you got a positive review. Palgrave says, yes, we issue you a contract. You agree timeframes. Say, this is when I deliver the manuscript. Once you deliver the manuscript, Palgrave will send you, even before you deliver the manuscript, a long file with all the things that we need. And you then deliver the manuscript with all the additional documents. You submit this, then it goes to the copy editors. They will work with you as the author to make sure that everything is again spell checked, it's formatted properly. If you use any images, you have the copyright for those images. You double check that all the images are correct. There is a very funny story. We've just finished editing a volume, me and the wonderful Alice McCulloch, who you just heard, in the series on power sharing in Europe. And we had a map in there on Cyprus, which said Turkish Republic of North Cyprus. The author was not very pleased with that, because clearly that state is only recognized by Turkey. And since the author also works for the UN in the peace negotiation, him publishing a map he claimed to kind of have recognized that state can have severe consequences. So we changed the map, and then those kind of things can then a little bit delay publication. But basically, at the end of it, you get a wonderful, nice, shiny book. This is how they look like, right? This is the color we chose. Why did we choose kind of this color because it's the favorite color of my daughter. Isn't that nice? Right, so this is the book that we've recently published on political economy of federalism in Nigeria. That's from last year. I promised you the Ukraine one that's up here. There you go. That's the Ukraine book. That's the latest we've published in the series, Decentralization, Regional Diversity and Conflict in Ukraine. The power sharing in Europe is coming out a bit later, I think early next year now. So that's a little bit the process. I thought I'll talk you through the process so you get an idea for how the process works. And then we can pick up some of the elements of what you can do, particularly about the review process and how you can make the proposal interesting and original so that you increase your chances of getting published at a later point. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Søren, for this very good overview of the whole process. Let's immediately move on to Christina, who is a co-editor of Regional and Federal Studies, or another journal. Yeah, looking forward to hearing your experience.
Okay, did I manage to unmute? Yeah, I think I did. Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for inviting me to participate in this roundtable. So a lot has been said already. I think like Søren, I'm just going to give a brief overview of what we do as a journal. So the journal is called Regional and Federal Studies. And unlike the nationalism and ethnicity journals we've heard about, it's maybe not as intimately connected to the research network. However, as you, of course, all aware of, and this came out in Søren's presentation of the book series, many issues of minority ethnic conflict, minority nationalism actually play out through a connection to a territory. And they're often accommodated with territorial solutions. So there is still, if not an inherent, but a close connection to the kind of research we publish in regional and federal studies and the kind of research that members of this network are doing. So specifically what we are interested in as a journal is pretty much, like to say it loosely, anything that has to do with the division of authority across different levels of government. So as soon as there is some kind of multi-level dynamics of political decision-making, as soon as you have regions either below the nation state or supranational levels above the nation state that co-decide together with the nation state level, it begins to become interesting for us. That already speaks to kind of the fit point that Alison and also Timofey and also Søren mentioned. So just like this holds for any journal, like for any other journal, we have our specific aims and scope, and we are searching for articles that fit into that. One thing I should say, maybe in addition to what has been said, is that it can be really helpful to not just read the mission statement, but to also think about, when you're thinking about where to submit your article, which journals have published a lot of work that you're engaging with in your research. So usually there is a natural connection. There are some journals that you never cite, and then it's going to be a bit of a stretch to try and submit there. You can actually check your own references and see, okay, where are the debates actually taking place that I'm interested in? That can be a good first hint for you to think about which journals to submit your work to, because then you already have this academic debate connection that will ensure that you have the right fit. In terms of our journal, I already told you about the substantive criteria, so pretty broad, like anything like territorial government, political authority divided across levels of government. In terms of the distinctions that Timofey made, we are a field journal, so we're specifically interested in that subfield of regional and federal studies. So we're not narrowly thinking just of federalism, just like Søren mentioned also for the book series, we're very much equally interested. That's why we're called regional and federal studies. We're very much also interested in any kind of other processes, regionalization, devolution, decentralization that allocate some kind of decision-making power or implementation power to other levels of government. It does not have to be a full-fledged federation for us to be interesting. So we're a field journal interested in these issues. In terms of geography, we had a long-standing tradition in covering a lot of Western European cases, and we're really making an effort to become more global. that is also visible in the team of editors that we now have. So we have Louise Tillin, who's an expert on Asia. We have Imke Harbers, who's an expert on Latin America. Then we have Michael Tetem, who represents the traditional Western European focus. And then there's me, and I bring in some Eastern European expertise. So we're really trying to reflect that in the team of associate editors that we have at the moment. And this is really also a call to you. If you have exciting research that deals with territorial conflicts, accommodation of minority interests, in Nigeria was just mentioned as an example, or like subnational politics, subnational policymaking in Latin America, indigenous issues like laws that target, like in Bolivia, that target indigenous minorities differently across regions. So that is all, like, for us currently, that is really where we're trying to go. So I'm not saying that anyone working on the UK should stop submitting, but we are currently like really actively encouraging people covering cases that have been less covered by our journal in the past, which had a strong Western European focus. So we're still trying to maintain that, but I would warmly invite contributions in particular on any other part of the world that is not Western Europe, or I should also say North America, Australia, and Canada. These have also been heavily covered, so pretty much a Western focus that we see, unfortunately, in a lot of political science journals. I don't know so much about other disciplines. I guess anthropology would be a very different story here. So that's something I wanted to add that hasn't been said before. Another thing I wanted to add, so as the speakers before, I also subscribe to anything that Alison has said about how we take decisions about whether to send something out or whether to desk reject it immediately. I wanted to add something that can also help you get past desk reject, and that is really spend some time in your introduction and conclusion. So make sure that an editor who sees a lot of articles, and usually you also have to think about the fact that we as editors, we kind of do this as a side job to our ordinary academic careers. So while we commit fully to this position, we still usually sort of, I don't know how the others do this, but we usually dedicate some time every week where we will deal with the editing process. And you have to think that these people are sitting there and they probably see a lot of articles and they sort of want to quickly get at what your article is about. And you can help them and make them sort of better understand what your point is if you really invest some time in the introduction and conclusion. I'm sometimes puzzled by how papers really only come out with their main statement, main argument somewhere in the second or third section of the paper. So I think what really helps there is just before submitting, give the paper to somebody who is not so knowledgeable about your research field. Don't give it to your mom or your dad who don't have anything to do with your discipline. Give it to somebody from your discipline, but give it to somebody who's not as narrowly into the subject as you are after working on it for months and months and months, because that really helps. And don't submit it right away. When you think it's done, take that extra step, go to a friend like from your department or so on, just say, will you just read the introduction and the conclusion, if that tells you what I'm after. And I think if that person then comes back and says, no, I couldn't figure out what you're writing about, then you need to take a step back and you need to just try to make yourself clearer in the introduction and conclusion. Because also the editor of the journal is not going to be studying the same case or the same research question that you are studying. They're going to be people who know about your field because you try to make your research, to submit your research to somewhere where it fits, but they're never going to be that person who is as knowledgeable as you are about the intricacies of the Northern Irish conflict, for example. So make this extra step. I think that can really help. Other than that, I thought there were excellent recommendations made. I would strongly also subscribe or underline the point that Alison made about being explicit about your methodology. I could relate very well to when she said this. She sees so many papers that do not discuss at all what they're doing methodologically. So as you go, like, take this extra step to say, what is my paper about substantively? Also take that extra step to say, how am I researching my question? And if you're writing a conceptual paper, which can also happen, which can be super helpful, you can also say that. You can say, I'm making a conceptual contribution by classifying, I don't know, types of power sharing in a new way. Excellent. You don't always need like an empirical, a super involved empirical research method. At least at Regional Federal Studies, we've published a lot of conceptual work throughout the years, and I think that's really helpful, in particular as we go branch into new regions of the world where maybe the phenomena are not as mapped. We just had a very nice paper published, Early View, about urban politics and metropolitan governance in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's a mapping paper that has a really nice typology and just maps competencies and sort of what urban governance consists in this field. So whatever you do, whether it's conceptual, empirical, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, as Alison said, just tell the reader and the editor what it is, because otherwise you run the risk that the editor is going to think, well, this is more an essay or a think piece. So this is not for us. We're publishing full-fledged research articles. If there's no research with a methodology presented to me, or I'm not told what kind of research approach is taken, I might just say, oh, this is not a research article. I'm just rejecting it. And we get a lot of these that look more like think pieces. So how to reform, I don't know, this kind of like how to reform German federalism without analyzing sort of empirically what the misgivings are. So yeah, I think these are the things I can add, and I can add more. I mean, Johanna also said to talk about our author's experience. The others haven't done that so far, so I would maybe keep that for the second round, if so we keep a bit more harmony in the different mentionings.
Well, thank you very much. And I think it would be really interesting to hear about your personal experiences in the second round, indeed. But for now, let's move on to Daryl, who can talk about his experience in regard to policy and society. So that's another journal.
Hi, thanks, and thanks for the invitation. It's very nice to be with you all. Yeah, I'm involved in policy and society, which has been a bit of a baby that we inherited over 20 years ago and kind of turned it around into a mainstream public policy journal. But it's slightly different insofar as we publish only thematic issues. I wouldn't call them special issues insofar as we don't have calls for papers around a theme, but we do actively engage with collections of scholars who are working on a topic, be that collaborative governance or public policy and the rise of authoritarianism, whatever it might be, and we work with them to, if you like, curate a series of articles around that theme so that there's a thematic continuity. These are not sort of working in divergent areas. They're really trying to mutually address a topic of mutual interest. The other things that I work on with Toby Carroll and Paul Kamek and Kelly Gerard are two series, one for Palgrave, which is the Studies in the Political Economy of Public Policy, and a new series that will launch early next year with Routledge, which is simply titled Power and Policy, and I think the title should give you an idea of what it's about. Rather than reiterate what the other speakers have said, all of which are very good points in terms of the technicalities of making sure manuscripts are appropriate for the journal in which you're seeking to target. That's all very important, of course it is. But I also think you probably need to put yourself in the mindset of editors who are also offering or working under constraints, unfortunately. And their number one constraint that we as journal editors work under, perhaps less so for book series editors, but for journal editors, the number one constraint that we have each and every year as we make our report to the editorial board members, the only question they have, they're a little bit like sort of corporate boards in a corporate thing, and their bottom line is, so what's happened to your impact factor? And you are judged in terms of success or failure in terms of where your impact factor is going. And so all they want to see, well, their first question always is your impact factor going up or going down? If it's going up, they don't want to hear from you again for another year. If it's going down, you have a crisis and you need to do something, which is a really narrow instrumentalist way of approaching scholarship, thoroughly objectionable, but that's the world we seem to live in. So if you put yourself in the mindset of an editor, invariably every journal article you're looking at it in terms of its possibility, in terms of citations and impact, and a terrible instrumentalist way. But that should also inform, I think, the strategies that you as an author adopt in terms of getting papers published. So at the end of each year, our current publisher, Taylor & Francis, the journal will move next year, give us a very detailed account of every article, impact, where it was downloaded, citations, mentions, so forth and so on. There's a whole bunch of metrics. Everyone knows what they are. And we can tell exactly where most papers have gone, who's read them, who hasn't, and why, right down to the institutional downloads. So it's quite an amazing set of data we have. And what we can see from that, if we sit down and do the analysis that we do every year, is that unfortunately, just because they're new and perhaps don't have their own networks, young scholars are more likely than not to get cited. PhD students probably won't get cited, at least in the 2-year cycle via which, SSCI journals count citation impact. We can see that case studies are much less likely to get cited because of the sort of specific nature of the topic they're covering. Their readership will not be as wide. On the other side of the equation, what we can always see is that articles which are structured in a way they're trying to answer a theoretical and or conceptual and or cut into the literature in terms of schools of thought and debates, albeit they might be using a case study to illustrate their argument, they always get cited. So anything to do with literature reviews or theoretical framings which pretend to enlighten us about one school of thought over another, or a new school of thought, or a different means for typologizing approaches to a topic, will always get much better citations. And likewise, what we can also always observe is established scholars, when publishing with junior scholars will get the citation from that. So for better or worse, I'm not saying this is a great thing, but I'm saying in terms of the sort of the corporate mentality of chasing citations and impact and making sure the journal goes up each year in its metrics, if you can follow those sorts of rules, I think they're fairly simple. Working with a senior colleague in an area in which your research is based is helpful. It's not necessary, but it is helpful. I think it puts the minds of editors at rest in terms of the possibility of that paper for citation. Working in terms of offering a new insight to a theoretical approach, a conceptual set of debates, or using the case study and framing that in terms of a broader theoretical picture is much more likely to be accepted and likely to get cited. And I think that the evidence is quite overwhelming for that, not just in our journal, but one of my co-editors, Mike Howlett, who sits in Policy Sciences, is the editor of that. One of my other friends, Les, who's on the Journal for Comparative Policy Analysis, I mean, these are the same metrics they observe as well. So that tends to, I think, guide editorial decisions about the types of papers, or at least how they're framed, which can be beneficial to ensuring to some degree that they will receive citations, and hence the impact factor of a journal will not be adversely impacted. And that becomes more acute the further you go on in this silly business of chasing citations, insofar as a 0 citation has a much more deleterious impact on your overall ranking than just a one-cited paper. So it really is a silly game. I don't agree with it, but that's the world we operate in. The other thing I'd note, and that is, I'm really averse to thinking about editorial responsibility as gatekeeping. I think that's really a wrong way to think about what editors do. At Policy and Society and in the series editors that I work with for books, I really think that our role is as a facilitator and trying to develop and encourage content. There is a huge hunger for content, and there is insufficient quality content. So we're all chasing content. So I think as an author, you're a seller, but you're also quite a powerful seller if you meet the technical specifications that the previous speakers have spoken about, and you've managed to sort of think through the possibility of your paper having citation potential. If you're positioned in that category, I think you're in a very powerful position in terms of convincing editors that my paper is going to be a good fit and good for your journal. So I would really encourage authors to work with editors. In fact, that's what we do, both in terms of going out to try and encourage guest editors to work with a group of authors to put together concepts and see them through in the next 18-month cycle through to publication. But also we've done this a lot with individual authors for the book series. People have come in initially with a kind of one-pager, very underdeveloped, but kind of interesting. It's got potential. And we've worked with them over the course of the next 2 years to turn it into a book. And it's kind of gone through reiterations and reformulation, and you can see them developing this, and then, aha, yes, finally having that breakthrough, and it comes out as a great monograph. So I really would think about approaching editors not necessarily, here's my paper, do you like it? No, okay, off I go to the next one. But actually talking to an editor saying, hey, listen, I've got an idea in mind. Does this fly? Does it sit? Or how would I need to reposition it or sort of, restructure it to me? That's always welcome, and invariably it always leads to success, I think. So I wouldn't look at editors as gatekeepers. Editors are really in need of content. It's the sort of the water that keeps everything flowing. I would approach editors and talk to them, and once you've established a relationship, have a Zoom conversation, which we do all the time. Ideas kind of just snowball. You bring in other people in terms of a special collection or an editor collection, and they really work quite well over the course of the next 12, 18 months.
Thank you very much for these very interesting insights and advice. So we've now finished the first round of interventions, and maybe just a quick quick advice. So if anyone has questions or something, you should be able to use the chat function, I hope. So we'll do a second round, and then I would take questions. But if obviously any question comes to mind right now, you can put it in the chat, and then I'll ask the panelists to provide a good answer. Let's do a second round, starting with Timofey. You've already mentioned a lot of important elements that make a successful submission. So I think if you would like to add anything to that, you can do that now. But I would also like you to tell us something about what is a bad submission. I think it really helps to avoid making the mistakes that everybody else has already made, and which then leads to a success, or can lead to a successful submission. So I would like to hear something about maybe some really bad submissions that you have received that gives some information on what to avoid. And then, as Christina has already mentioned, you have a lot of experience about publishing as well in different journals, different books, and so on. So if you have anything to share, any submission that you have put in that was really successful, anything that didn't work, again, I think that these are really useful insights. So Timofey, the floor is yours. Yeah,
thanks again. I can just echo Darryl's points there on general rule that the editors are assuming in filtering through the amount of papers and on publications or pre-publications that are coming in. And I think Christina was the first to mention this. We do all of this in essentially in our free time. So that puts a lot of pressure on us to make decisions that are in part going to influence the development of a discipline or the development of discussion in the area that we are publishing in or coordinating publications in. But at the same time, we also need to be cognizant of requirements of our publishers. And I think these are the main constraints that we have heard, we all have talked about here, that we all see in the process of publication. And these reflect directly on what makes a bad submission. So submissions that could have been thrown at any other journal are definitely not good submissions. You need to underline why you are submitting to this specific journal, and you do this not in an email that accompanies your submission, but it should be visible from either from the abstract or on the first page in the introduction of your paper. Very much along the lines that Christina was mentioning before, the introduction and abstract are essentially the teasers for the reader to continue reading. But submissions that do not come back to those tasty bits that you threw in at the beginning when the paper is finishing in the conclusions tend to be rather disjointed as well. So an important marker of a bad paper is that there is no narrative that goes from start to till the finish, and that questions or puzzles that you have unpacked in the beginning are never returned to in conclusion. I think one of the interesting things that we observe in our journal in National and Ethnic Politics that's specific to younger early career academics is that people tend to use a lot of colorful language when it comes to titles of their papers, and also throughout their introductory messages in the introduction to the paper. And then many of those interesting and flashy points are never really recollected or collected together in the conclusion, which means that there has been some effort made in selling the paper, but then it's like with a good seller, with a bad seller, you sell the product, but then it turns out to be rather rubbish when you come to the end of the paper, and that might have started in an attractive way, but then fizzles out as it goes along. So I think these two things, the good sell needs to be followed up by the good product, and also the appropriateness of the product for the audience that you're trying to pitch to, two things that are important ones for good papers, but they also mark out the unsuccessful submissions throughout. In terms of editorial management of the book series, I think again Daryl's points there are quite good, because they also Daryl speaks about the positives of submissions, but these are in inverse also the negatives. We do we appreciate that for many people writing a book is a long and laborious process, but for those people who are making the decision on whether to publish your book-long contribution in a series, this would be just one of many book-long contributions that they would be sifting through in their free time again. And therefore, those book-long contributions, even if they are full of interesting and insightful and unique material from your case studies, need to be framed in a way that is attractive to scholars that have never concerned themselves with an issue before or with an area. So if you are thinking about multi-level governance in some less studied country, or with power sharing in regions that are never discussed, such as Suriname, for example, underlying the details of the case is important, but the general implications of that study for the wider audience of, let's say, not of Suriname studies, but of power sharing is essential, or maybe of international impact on power sharing developments is key. So this is one of the more successful experiences that I have observed in the past year in publication track record. But I think overall the unsuccessful publications are relatively clear to see, because they are insufficiently clearly pitched to the publisher. Secondly, they are inconsistent in their presentation, what they promised that they would do and what they do in the end. And finally, they are probably unsystematic in the way of delivery. And I think the unsystematic nature could be the result of lack of clearance on the side of the author about their focus of engagement, whether with theory or with a case study, which again might be reflective of their lack of commitment to either theoretical contribution of the paper or the contribution to the case study, to understanding the case study. But ultimately, the lack of systematic approach in publication, whether a journal article or the book, are reflective of lack of understanding in authors what it is that they are producing. And I think good authors are not born. They are learning through the process of revision and submitting papers over and over again, and develop their experience over time. So if you don't succeed at first, try again and take the advice of your series editors, of journal editors seriously, because ultimately what they want to do, they want to guide you, or we want to guide you through the submission process. There is a potential in every paper and in every book idea. There is a potential for a good and valuable contribution to debate. It is only you who can identify that audience that you are talking to that will learn. We are, in a sense, we are gatekeepers, because we allow you, we tell you that you are not ready yet to speak to that audience, because you haven't identified that audience clearly. And once you do, I think the writing of a book proposal, of paper, and of the book will become easier, and there will be a great take up on those ideas in the scholarship out there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Timo. I think that was a good summary of your talk. Is that it is a learning process. So I think that's key, and I think this kind of roundtable will hopefully contribute to this learning process. And the next contributor is Søren. What about your thoughts on what is a bad article or a bad book proposal actually for your series?
I think bad proposals have two main problems. The first one is, and I think that's been mentioned before, is they are not particularly original. What does not particularly original mean? Well, it can mean they are bland on a topic that has just been studied 1,000 times, right? There are topics where you go like, what do we really need another book on that, right? It's really hard to now choose examples because I don't want to, talk badly about any of my colleagues who do research, but there are certain topics. I mean, one of the things that's happening this year is you have the 25th anniversary of the peace agreement in Bosnia, right? And you see all of these papers again on assessing the Dayton peace agreement and Bosnia's constitution. And I'm like, really, have we not said everything there is to say about this? I mean, I've written 2 books about it. So, it's kind of, I feel like I have said everything that there is to say about it. So there are those things where you think that I'm not sure something new can be said. That happens rarely. You get that rarely. It does happen, but it gets rarely. What happens more often is what Christina has mentioned, that there is actually an interesting idea, but it's very badly packaged. Right? So that might be some reform initiatives, that might be rethinking this idea, and then the original idea is never presented, that's being rethought. It might be that, thinking about Canada, Quebec in the 21st century without mentioning that Canada and Quebec also had a relationship in the 20th century, possibly quite important to, contextualize. So it's those kind of things. I've looked at proposals where you had lots of quantitative methods to second what Alison said, which weren't contextualized. So, as Daryl has said, if you use large N studies, you are more likely to be quoted. You still have to do it well. You still have to explain to your audience what you are doing and why you're using what you are using. So I think these are the kind of problems. It's like, make clear. I always say, have something to say and say it. Be clear on what your contribution is. Don't just hang something in the air. Also, don't hang something in the air like you are revolutionizing the field. Chances are you're not. Right? Let's be honest. So make clear what and where your contribution lies. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is bad proposals are badly written. And that starts with, I've had a proposal once that misspelled my name. Not a great start, That's like, this is, to use a gatekeeper analogy, you're kind of, upsetting the gatekeeper. Not a great start. Not that I'm superficial enough to let that guide the proposal, but it didn't get better after that either. So, do spend a bit of time on check, for spelling mistakes, check the grammar there, check that your proposal covers everything. Right, that is important for a book series. Like, I need to know, do you know what your competitor books are? Right, I'm selling it to a publisher, and the publisher is basically a business. They are interested in making money. So they need to know how many books have been published on this topic and how are they doing and where have they. So it's those kind of things which I think are important. The other thing that is quite important is just follow formal guidelines. And that goes for books as much as for journal articles, right? You can very much upset a journal editor if the journal says you have up to 9,000 words and you submit a 13,000 word paper, right? Not a great idea, because let's be honest, right? Reviewers never ask you to cut. Reviewers will only ever ask you to add things, right? So keep those things in mind. The other thing that I always say, what makes a kind of good proposal is that what we've mentioned before is that it's targeted. And what do I mean by that? I've had this experience, not necessarily with books, but certainly with journal articles, that they got rejected because they were for the wrong audience, for the wrong journal. The same article with a few revisions then got accepted somewhere else. These are the kind of things what Timothy said, you live and learn, right? Sometimes you make wrong choices. But just to second what Daryl has said, is I also don't want to sound like, so negative and, oh, you have to do all of this and it's so hard and there are all these gatekeepers and all these reviewers, right? The truth is that book series editors and journal editors are always on the lookout for good manuscripts, right? They want to publish good manuscripts. They rely on good manuscripts. Right? So there's no reason why you wouldn't get published if you have a good manuscript. Just spend the time on making sure you have a good idea, develop that idea properly. As Christina has said, get feedback. I always get feedback. I have a network of colleagues where I send my work to. And sometimes Christina's absolutely right. Sometimes these are not experts on the topic, but they are academics who will know how a good article has to look like. Right? So get that feedback and do spend the extra time on formal criteria. That's just important because it's just annoying if you don't meet those, right? So I would say these are the kind of things that are really important. But don't shy away from like also going for the big journals, right? If you have a very, very good paper, if you have a very good idea, why not go for the big journals, for the big book series? Don't be afraid of that. They are interested in good ideas. Right, so I would always encourage you to do that. And the final point I would like to say is, and I'd like to hear what Christina and Daryl have to say from their journal experience. But certainly, I mean, I'm a little bit involved with the journal in ethnopolitics, and one of the things I've learned there over the years is major corrections is the rule, not the exception. Okay, if you get major corrections, basically the reviewers are saying they like your paper. They're basically saying you've got a good idea which is worth publishing. It just needs more work. Okay, so I know when you've spent 3, 4, 6, 8 months on a paper, or 2 years on a paper sometimes, and then you get major revisions, sometimes 6 months after you've submitted it, you've moved on in life, you've done something completely different. It can be frustrating. But major revisions basically says, if the editor of a journal says it's major revisions, it basically says, look, we would like to publish your work, but we think it needs a bit more work before it's there, right? And that's how you should read it. So you should go the extra mile. Ha! Here's my reference to the Brexit talk. You should go the extra mile and, do those major revisions. Take them seriously. Take reviewers seriously, because a lot of reviewers do that for free and spend a lot of time, right? So, but don't get upset if you get major corrections. Major correction still means you are basically getting there. You have a good chance of seeing your article published, right? So do take those things seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Søren. I'll immediately pass on that question to Christina. Are major revisions good? Do they mean what Søren interprets meaning? And yeah, what would be a bad article from your perspective?
Yeah, so I can only underline that. So I was lucky because my supervisor back in Cologne, where I did my PhD, Andre Kaiser, the first thing he said as we all started submitting papers to journals, he was always saying, if you get a major revision or revise and resubmit, go and open the bottle of champagne. And I think that's a super important message. I've come across a lot of people who didn't learn that early enough, and they were so frustrated, and it can be so demotivating. But if you get into that whole process with the idea, that's the best outcome that can happen. So the default is going to be I get rejected anyway, either by the editor right away or later throughout the review process. And the best possible outcome is I get the invitation to do major revisions on my work and improve it. And yeah, I as an author, I've never had anything below major revisions. So all the publications that are out, my publications, my own publications, they all got major revisions. I've never seen minor revisions, and I've never seen a direct accept. I'm sure they exist, but at least it hasn't happened to me. And of course, you're frustrated initially a little bit. I mean, you're happy because you got the R&R, but then you read it, you go like, this is daunting. There are all these pages filled with all these nitty gritty comments, and they didn't understand my work. And but then put it aside for a night, and then the next day you look at it again, and then yeah. And always with hindsight, I think I've been angry about a lot of comments I got as an author, and eventually the paper was always better. And I think that's an experience that's very widely shared. I can already see people nodding. So at the beginning, like Søren said, you've already worked on this for like two years, or right now I'm trying to get a paper published. We've collected historical data. It took us almost 4 years and it still gets rejected. And you're so angry because you're like, I invested all this work. How can they not see this effort? But then, yeah, even as it got rejected based on reviews, we used the reviews to improve the paper. We submitted somewhere else. It's now a much better paper. So even if you get rejected with reviews, it's still good because you can work on the paper, and you have to see that the reviewers are going to comment much more cruelly, but also much more diligently on your paper most of the time, I think, than anyone else. Like definitely more than people at conferences who are discussants. They do a good job, but they have 5 minutes to talk about 4 papers. So also take the review process as a feedback process. Go in with that mindset. R&R is the best that can happen. Then I'm going to get out a bottle of champagne or whatever you like drinking, and take it as part of your research process, as part of a feedback process. Like don't hesitate to submit because you're scared of getting rejected. Like it's like take the steps that we recommended before to get you beyond a desk reject, because there you can't do much. You don't get a lot of feedback. You'll get like, I mean, I think responsible editors also take some time to at least justify in a sentence why they desk reject your paper, but that's not a lot of feedback. But if you get past the desk reject following our advice we gave before, then you have got something you can work with. So you can go into the next step. One thing I wanted to add, because it struck me a bit that we were getting into this frame of it's all about the impact factor. I wanted to just say that, at least in my own experience as an author, you can, if you have a good idea and you like, I think Daryl was the one mentioning it, that if you have like good conceptual and theoretical contribution that speaks to a wider audience and opens new debates in the discipline, even though you're a young author and you're only just starting, don't hesitate. I would not totally subscribe to that idea that you should hunt out senior scholars. At least from my own experience, I published my MA thesis in a very good journal. And I just submitted just me with my name that nobody knew. And the review process was actually like, of course, it was a major revision, but it turned out really well. So what I'm saying is it's not the only way. Like you don't necessarily have to cling yourself to a senior scholar, because your ideas can be very strong. But seek out feedback. And if you get feedback from people who are well established in the discipline, they say, well, that's a really creative, innovative idea. You can really make a contribution there. Then don't go hunting someone who can put their name on your paper. Because there are also these like predatory older academics, I would call them, who like to sort of put their name onto publications. And I think that's something that you, I'm talking a bit more to the young scholars, because I guess this panel is more interesting for sort of upcoming academics. Yeah, also have the self-confidence. If you have gotten positive feedback, maybe at conferences, maybe from your supervisors, that there really is something very innovative and genuinely interesting to your research, then believe in yourself and also try submitting it on your own. Because at least the high quality journals, they do take, at least in my experience, they do take the peer review seriously. So I know we hear about network effects, and they surely exist. And I just saw a recent paper from economists that really study that people who are at the same departments as editors of journals, then the sort of the publication rates for these departments just increases in these journals. So we all know there are network effects, but nonetheless, I mean, as long as a journal has peer review and you get past the desk reject stage, the editor is not the only powerful player in the room anymore. Like if you get like 2 or 3 overwhelmingly positive reviews that really say this needs to be improved, but it can be improved, it can make a contribution, and I don't see an editor who takes his or her job seriously to then say, well, that's only a younger scholar, is not going to get cited, so I'm going to reject it anyway. So I just wanted to put a bit of sort of I can totally see the point that everybody is under pressure to increase the citations of their journal publications as editors, but I also wanted to say, nevertheless, in the end, we're all academics and we care about like good and innovative research, and we also should keep our stance also when debating with the money-making machine of the journals, who all sort of in the end exploit our voluntary work on all ends and then make a lot of money with it. So we should also be critical, even though we do the job for them because we need this venue. Actually, my hope would be that one day we're going to be all publishing in open access journals and we're going to leave that behind.
Thank you very much, Christina, for this very encouraging talk. I think that, I don't know, I remember when I was a PhD student, I attended these panels on how to get published. Everything seemed very discouraging because it seemed so difficult. So I think it's good to be encouraging at this stage. So Daryl, I guess that's advice you are, let's see what you have to say also on what Christina just said about the impact factor.
Actually, excellent comments. And like Christina, I hope I didn't come across as saying young scholars must publish with senior ones. You're quite right. We do have a lot of good papers, very good papers by junior scholars. I think perhaps I was speaking to, in the case of people who maybe have not framed, well, let me put it this way. They have a case study, and a very good case study, but they've not related it to the literature or to broader debates. And perhaps they have trouble doing that. And then sometimes having somebody co-author is helpful. But you're quite right. I mean, young scholars, if you've got, a way into the literature, you can frame it conceptually or say, hey, listen, this school of thought falls down for all the reasons no one's spoken about. Fantastic. And go for it alone. That certainly don't go for these predatory types that add their names to everything. There's far too many of them. Sorensen's comments as well about the reviews, what constitutes a good paper. I mean, you're quite right. The technicalities of a good paper are very important. And of course, getting the keywords, getting the titles right in terms of searchability. I mean, I'm as much, a naughty boy for doing this as well. I mean, I used to dream up esoteric titles just because it was fun when I was bored as a PhD student. But you've got to get beyond that in terms of searchability so that your work reaches out to others and people, when they search for it, get it. It's important stuff. I suppose let me talk about something slightly different rather than reiterating the very good comments by Sorensen and Christina. Reviews and how to handle a review process. I mean, from my perspective, sometimes bloody annoying. I've just had reviews back, 2 of them, and it's bloody annoying sometimes, and you never get over that. But you're quite right. To revise and resubmit are generally an indication that people have taken the work seriously as opposed to simply rejecting it. So that is a very good positive. And the norm seems to be there's no good paper or as good a paper that it's going to get immediately accepted. Minor modifications, very rarely for reasons to do, I think, with reviewers getting sometimes too focused on their own area or wanting people to steer it back toward their research or whatever it might be. So you're always going to get fairly substantial revisions. It's the nature of the business. I've come to the conclusion that it's actually better to have a 12-month, and I realize this is difficult for younger scholars, but for papers that you submit, and I'm very aware of this in my own work, if I can submit a paper and it doesn't come back for 9 or 12 months, I used to get mad at journals, but now I'm actually quite thankful because when I go back and finally read my own work again, I often read it thinking, which silly twit wrote this? Because this is awful. So you do get a sense, you get an objectivity. The further you are away from your own work, you do get a sense of being able to reread it critically in a way in which you can't when you've just authored it 3 months ago. You're still kind of in the mindset of the paper. So being able to read it objectively from a distance, some 9, 8, 12 months after you've read it, then getting the reviewer's comments, I think personally, for me, it makes it much easier to revise and resubmit. So that's quite a good strategy if you've got the luxury of having that much time. But as a junior scholar, of course, you're under the pump to get things out as soon as you can. What else was I going to say? How to handle reviewers. I mean, and I think this is a job where we as editors sometimes don't step up to the mark as much as we should. There are bad reviews and bad reviewers. Not all the case, and I think that would be in 20% of the cases I see what I would call lazy reviews, which are sort of half a page of, I would have liked to have read a paper that spoke to my interests, or gee, I didn't get cited, which is code for, I'm not going to approve this. Or I would like you to frame it in this way because that's the way I think is appropriate. They're type of very subjective observations by reviewers without engaging with the argument or the standpoint of the paper. And I think we as editors should probably be a little bit more dismissive of those reviews because they're not really conceptually engaging in a way that's going to add value in terms of revisions. And unfortunately, I often see editors from all sorts of journals, and we've been guilty of doing this ourselves because of time pressures, just throwing back the 3 or 4 reviews. One says do this, one says do that, and yet they'll work it out. And I actually think that's bad editorship. We should, I think, be a little bit more interventionist into sidelining those reviews which aren't quite up to scratch. And I've seen some very good authors respond in ways to tell us our job, and they've done it nicely and appropriately. That listen, I'm not going to take that seriously, reviewer X and Y, because they've really not taken me seriously, whereas reviewers 1 and 2 have. And so let me speak to their responses. And we as editors, I think, have got quite right. We were too lazy to do that, and the authors that have been bold enough to do that have always come out on top because they've picked up what's going on in terms of the lazy review. So I'd actually encourage people, if it really is a genuinely lazy review, to do that and to marginalize some of those comments for what they are. Not that substantive, not that constructive. They won't improve the scholarship or the outcome of the paper. And I think that's a very appropriate, sometimes what can be quite bizarre reviews. So I would encourage people to do that as well, as a way of just trying to get yourself through the review process. But having some space from your own work in terms of objectivity, I think is really useful in conjunction with the review process.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the audience? I don't see any in the chat so far, so but if anything comes up, please raise your hands or type your questions on the chat. I think Søren either has probably not a question, but more a comment, I suppose. So I'll hand over to him now, but if any questions come up, please ask them.
Yeah, thank you, Johanna. I just very briefly want to second what Daryl has just said, and want to just make a shout out to everybody, especially younger academics who will soon start the joy of reviewing work of others. Do remember that the person who will read your review at the other side of a screen is still a human being. Okay, the challenge is not to make them cry or destroy them. Okay, I mean, I have read some horrendous feedback, which I know nobody would ever say to me in my face, right? But they use the anonymity of the process I mean, I had comments like the best thing about this paper were the footnotes, right? But which, is funny now, but when you are a PhD student who spent a year and a half working on that paper, you feel like crying, right? I had papers that accused me of political, a clear political propaganda, right? So it's be critical, be honest, but don't forget basic good manners, right? It's about a critical discourse, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't reject papers or you shouldn't, suggest major revisions, but, don't make reviewing a process about destroying the person on the other side. That's just a horrible thing to do. And there are people out there who do that, and we need to make sure that that stops, right? So this anonymity of the process is there to ensure academic rigor, not to allow people to bully each other.
I guess that's a very good point, sir. And I guess we've all had this experience of getting reviews that are just difficult to digest, if at all possible. Timofey would like to add something.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's the very important point in and distinguishes clearly between different types of journals that we're talking about. I think it is we clearly see that the quest for personal destruction of your opponent happening in many journals and many review processes, and particularly as a book series editor, I have responsibility for identifying reviewers for book proposals, and even there are people who I have chosen to review book proposals that come back very often with personalized statements or statements about the inappropriateness of conclusions. But I think this is in part also the legacy or the result of our either issue or regional specific focus in the study of ethnicity and nationalism. Yeah, things are very contested there. We look at case or country-specific journals. There is always a reviewer who would say you have forgotten an event that happened 2,500 years ago. That must have been important for contemporary political mobilization, potentially, or anything. So some of these perspectives, theoretical perspectives, rather, lend themselves easier to personalized and allegedly ideology-driven statements, comments by reviewers. And I would encourage all the authors who craft their papers to check once again before submitting whether you are yourself part of that problem, that you might have not been careful in expressing your ideas in a way that is unbiased and can easily appeal to pros and cons of the side of the argument that you're trying to cover. Because particularly in the issue area of ethnicity and nationalism studies, everything is contested. The names of groups are contested, the relationship between groups and states are contested. And I think I see Christina agrees with that. I also had papers rejected because someone didn't like my use of the keyword. How do we refer to those Russian speakers in the Baltic states? Are they minorities, or maybe they are immigrants or occupants? Whatever. So the keywords the keyword concept you use throughout the paper might also result in rejection, where again, I think that can be avoided if you find something more neutral and try to bring as many people on board to allow your reviewers of your paper to see the paper not as a political statement, but as an effort to conceptually engage the audience, which is as broad as possible, and give them food for thought for considering what they have been doing in the past or what they will be doing in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. I've seen that Dara would like to add something. Maybe I would add a question to him, because you mentioned on authors about authors being able to respond well to reviewer feedback, and also to identify which feedback is useful and which one isn't. So maybe you could also now, if you, after your comment, add something on how exactly to respond to reviews, like what kind of format, how long should the letter be? Do we need to respond to every single point raised by the reviewers and all this? Maybe you have some advice on that as well.
So was that to me or to?
Well, to you, because you raised your hand.
Sorry, so, sure. So okay, I'll just give you one example. I mean, I think that's up to some degree. The authors have got quite a bit of latitude in terms of how they respond. I just got a paper back from, what was it called? Higher Education Research and Development. And they mechanicalize this, so they make you highlight in yellow or red, whatever it is, every word or paragraph that you change, so they can compare it against the original text. So they want a detailed statement by statement response to the reviewer. That's probably overly mechanical, but it does help, I think, guest editors understand the extent of the changes and what they've done to address the author's comments. I tend to think that's probably a good way to go. Maybe not to that minutiae of detail, but it tends to, I think, help inform the editor, who, as Christina points out, you're time pressed all the time. What's been done, how they've responded, what it included. And that's a good process. But the reason I raised my hand was to carry on from Timofey's comments before. He made some good comments about book series and pitching books in terms of the way it should not just be necessarily a case study or a country study, so much as trying to relate that country study or case study to broader literature. What I find a lot of people do, junior and senior, is when it comes time to filling out that publishing proposal, when the publisher invariably asks for a market survey in terms of, who's your competitor, the tendency I often find, which I think is erroneous, is for scholars to say, it's unique, no one else has done anything, or there's only one other book published, to which publishers normally come back and go, gee, this is incredibly niche, I don't think it's for us. I actually think, you need to be aware that the best thing you can do is say that, listen, this book actually contributes to an enormous debate in the field through this case study or this approach. And in fact, it's a very vibrant, expansive literature that I think publishers normally find much more encouraging. I'll give you one example. We had a book given to us a year and a half, 2 years ago on looking essentially at food policy, food regulation in China. And the author was a Chinese recently graduated PhD student who did a very good thesis. But what she'd done essentially is said, look, it's the first Western analysis of regulation. And the publisher went, oh my God, well, I don't think we want that. It's too new for us. And we said, look, go back, and actually what you're talking about is the rise of regulatory states processes within China related to the food industry. So they made a really good then contribution in terms of the first 2 chapters, reframing it, the way in which there was a kind of ensconcing of these regulatory capitalist approaches into mainland China, using the case example of food regulation to demonstrate this. And once you've done that and related it to the broader, regulatory capitalism literature, the publisher just went, oh wow, yeah, okay, great, we want this. So it really wasn't changing the book. It was adding a couple of chapters that related it to the broader literature. So Timothy, I think, is quite right. You need to emphasize this in your proposal, both in terms of articles, but particularly for books, so that people understand where it's coming from. And there is a market for this stuff out there. There clearly is. The other thing I was going to say, and I don't want to harp on about social media all the time, and otherwise I know Christina will accuse me of being too driven by metrics, and believe me, I'm the first person to argue against this. But what I found, we've added recently a social media editor to our ranks, and what I found has been really useful is getting authors to commit to doing a 2 or 3 minute video. I know this is awful. Most people don't want to do this. I don't. I cringe at it. But getting authors to articulate in 2 or 3 minutes what they're doing, why, how it kind of changes framing, approach, understanding, is really useful to them in terms of how they finally put together their work. And it also helps with them getting their work out there to colleagues that may be interested. It cuts through in a way in which just having it listed in the search engine doesn't. So we found that works incredibly well for policy and society. And we're even thinking about doing it, if Routledge will allow us. Palgrave, I don't think, have the capacity, doing that for monographs as well. I mean, you can do it through, other social media like YouTube and that, getting people to paste a kind of mock interview or having the editor interview you with a set number of questions. But I really do think that helps get your work out there in a way which can be useful for class discussion or graduate classes or what have you. So I wouldn't discount that and making that statement within your publishing proposal for books as perhaps an attractive option that editors might like to consider. I see it working bit by bit, and I think it's probably going to be the way of the future as social media continues to occupy our lives.
Thank you very much. I still don't see any questions from the audience. This 4 more minutes. If any question comes to mind, does anyone from panelists like to add something? Timothy?
Yeah, I think if many of our attendees might not see the chat function, so if they want to have a question raised, they should raise their hand. But while they decide, I wanted also to come back to the current situation that we're in, and year 2020 has been quite challenging for most scholars around the world. This has not been mentioned now in the conversation, and this is one of those things that why we are here in the first place in this virtual space. Many conferences have fallen through, and we have also seen a considerable dip in submissions from certain groups of academics over the past year. we clearly see all those people that have a family submitting fewer publications this year. Among those who don't have a family but have some kind of caring responsibility, usually these are quite gender biased categories, have submitted fewer publications. Both in terms of papers and book proposals. There is there will be a significant dip in book proposal submissions over the coming years, we anticipate, because most of us, I don't know where you are based, but in this part of the world, field work has changed nature, and it's been impossible to travel. So there will be global repercussions on what we do and what kind of research we conduct. And I think I'm taking this as an opportunity to encourage again the younger scholars to consider what they have been doing and how they are able to present their work in this digital space as well. And Daryl's input on trying to pitch your papers in the online format, whatever is an interview or elsewhere, is a useful way to showcase what you do. But writing papers and books is likely to remain one of the key output avenues for us as academics. And I think from Alison McCullough and myself, on behalf of the journal, National Genetic Politics, we certainly would like to encourage everyone who has not had an opportunity to publish somewhere to come to us and discuss your potential ideas for publication. Come to me to discuss your book proposal, because this is a challenging time. You might have something on your desk, but as in my desk, things have been sitting around for months, and because I have other responsibilities that I need to prioritize. Many of our colleagues would be in the same place. So think about yourself as part of a global community of scholars who are, not all of whom have had a great time in 2020, and not all of whom have been able to publish a lot, and reconsider your role as part of this big machine of knowledge production and moving forward the scholarship. I think this is also an implicit encouragement to all people who are going to review papers this year and next year. Yeah, for most of us, submitting new papers have been a challenge, and probably, and I would encourage those of you reviewers to be kinder to your papers, maybe be more suggestive as to how those papers can be improved, rather than to reject them outright. I think that would do as a final statement from me as well. Thank you.
I think those are very great closing remarks. Does anyone would like to add anything? Has any question popped up? No, I think that's a lot of things to consider and to think about. So I guess all I can say is good luck with any publications, and good luck with the journals and the book series that all of you are editing. Thank you very much for participating in the roundtable, and thank you very much for attending. And yeah, have a very nice day and Merry Christmas.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for
Thank you very much, Johanna.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.